Fallout Equestria, Child of the Stars, Chapter 8, Part 6. I slowly rose to my hooves, desensitized to the sight of death and gore from having dealt so much of it myself. First, my eyes met with the legless buck, who had now fallen silent. Then, I looked over to the decapitated corpse, which was gradually losing its twitching onto the other side of the doorway. I asked her to do that. Actually, I forced her to do that. There was no way she could have disobeyed me, or rather, she was too afraid to disobey me, and yet in spite of her fearfulness of me, I'd made her kill another pony. The pink-coated mare trotted forward, her head still held above the bloody corpse of her most recent kill. I froze, paralyzed by a mysterious feeling of guilt, as she was forced to come face to face with what was left of the pony she decapitated. She paused, seeming to end her internal battle against the truth of the wasteland. I took a tentative step forwards towards her, followed by another until I was right by her side. "Cherry?" I asked with a feeling of trepidation, and she glanced back in my direction. Her eyes were teary, yet not really sad, and far from the trembling, wide spheres she bore when we met. It's okay. I'm okay," she stated weakly, most likely trying to deny the obvious reality that her mind was slowly being warped into the wasteland. When she dreamed of making a difference, had she imagined it to be like this? Had she known the cruel effects of the wasteland? I stepped past her, levitating my saddle blaster close. She wasn't okay. I didn't need to remind myself of that anymore. Now, she knew it for herself, and now she realized what killing other ponies did to her. It was something that the wasteland had done to me a long time ago. Though, unlike me, however, she was a strong pony, a far stronger pony than I'd ever been. She was simply accepting the truth of the wasteland, becoming like every survivor who lived on this miserable planet. I knew that I should stop her, preserve the timid little mare that I thought I'd seen in the saloon, yet that had not been the real her. That had been the weak husk of a pony recently exposed to the trauma of slavery and the casual disregard of any pony's life. The pony I had thought I'd seen was almost like a cocoon, a protective shell within which she'd been locked inside until now. Now, she was emerging a changed pony, the one who'd survived the murderous reality of the wasteland. A loud boom shook the pair of us back to reality as it traveled down the corridor. I looked up, shaking my head. There was yet another fork in the corridor just ahead. More distinctively was a sign that told me that the service elevator was still to the left. "Come on," I called back, moving forward. Once again, standing still for too long had disturbed my fucked up inside, yet the discomfort was getting far easier to deal with and had mostly faded the moment I had reached the corner of the hallway. Peering around the wall, I didn't see any pony. Instead, there was a thin barrier of curtain-like plastic sheets, illuminated by a bright glow. I didn't like the fact that they lacked the decency to let us see through them, yet if any pony was directly onto the other side, I was certain the light would have exposed their silhouettes. "It's clear," I whispered back. Cherry gave a slight nod, and I levitated my blaster round to my front before creeping around the corner. Brushing by the plastic barrier, I noticed the white laboratory was replaced by a large chamber of cold concrete walls, the likes of which I recognized. To my left was the metal door that Overseer had used to separate us, the likes of which was still firmly locked. A few hoof steps to my right was the large service elevator, and I could only glimpse the tracks as they led up into the tunnel over the crates that lay between us and it. Regardless, as we began to creep out from the corner, another loud boom sounded, shaking the chamber and its foundations. A rocket. I both heard the whoosh and saw it explode against the huge sub-level 3 written onto the chamber's domed roof. Both of us jumped as the faded shockwave of the explosion rushed by. I was just glad for our silent shock, however, as it was quite clear that we were not the only ones here. "Hit it again, we'll draw him out!" a fiercely aggressive buck barked. My ears perked up as the voice ran through my head, yet I found it far stranger. It didn't sound that old, barely even an adult, yet it resonated with a furious anger more frightening than the rage of Goddess Celestia. I stopped, my flank brushing against one of the Destiny Core crates as I peered around its edge. Standing before the elevator were several ponies, all displayed as red by my visor, and a buck paced angrily about the center of the room where he was surrounded by more bucks and mares, all wore the same black armored barding which had been worn onto the ponies we had encountered previously in the lower levels of this place, all of whom were bearing that strange star symbol upon their armor. Not only that, but many of them were armed with a vast assortment of weaponry, and all were staring timidly at the buck pacing between them. In a cage onto the elevator behind them were several almost animalistic raider ponies locked up in metallic cages, all gnashing and gnawing at the bars of their metal cages like wild animals. One buck stood before the very angry-looking stallion and calmly reloaded a saddle-mounted rocket launcher.
Well, that explains the explosions,
I surmised as I saw the corresponding hole in the roof. I'll draw him out and he'll tell me where the relics are. We didn't go through so much trouble to get in here only to leave with nothing, the angry adolescent-sounding leader bellowed, seemingly to himself. The young buck barely even looked bigger than me, which was surprising in itself, yet what I saw next confused me was far more than his youthful appearance. He wore a set of coal-black armor, which was lined with a red trim that glowed like hot embers. It bore a striking resemblance to that of the armor worn by the pre-war Royal Guard, but that, however, was where those similarities ceased. Beneath the suit was a strange metal harness stretched over his bulging muscles, almost like a tight metal brace for his entire body. The tarnished metal was harshly crafted into his blood-red coat, as evident by the deep scars around it. Over the back of his bare neck, the frame rose into 6 small glass cylinders, each filled with a bubbling red liquid and bearing syringes poised to strike directly into his spine. His eyes were bloodshot and crazed, like that of a raider. His teeth were sharpened like that of some hungry dragon, yet they were far too clean to be that of any run-of-the-mill savage wastelander. His mane and tail had been shaved off, and as most of his original coat, leaving the bulging red muscles beneath to shimmer like he was some sort of oversized plastic figurine. I would have almost said that he looked attractive in the way that a body sculptor is attractive, and I couldn't really help but think about what I'd do to a stallion with a physique like that if I had the opportunity. Yet his look was so unnatural and extreme that it was almost sickly, like he didn't even care about how hideous he became if his modifications denied the limitations of his carnal vessel, not to mention he was hot, for a great deal many other reasons. Most striking of all was the fire. His tail was formed from it as his helmet crest. Now, anywhere there may have been once a mane burned with flame, his metal horn was likewise wreathed in flame. Upon either side of said horn were pipes which seemingly fed fuel into what appeared to be a flamethrower at its tip. Both of his hooves and ankles were also laced with bright red flames, rising up from his formidably clawed, brazen hoof guards. In both instances, the flames scorched his red hide and blanked his flesh, yet did not eat at it. More confusing still was the lack of concern or pain that he showed. There was no sign of pure agony the flames must have induced, as they must have naturally seared him constantly. As for where they were coming from, I could only assume it was something built into his armor, judging by the 2 small gas tanks upon his back. All that built upon a buck was only about a week free of being a cult. He was in his late teens at best. His angry voice only reinforced my ideas, that like of a fool who couldn't get their own way. Yet, I had a feeling that this pony's temper tantrums didn't really end in a scolding and a banishment to his room. The front of his armor was doused in blood, the likes of which was almost invisible against his red hide. I mean, it almost certainly came from a beaten corpse that all but been crushed into an offal upon the concrete at his hooves. Carnage. Or at least I assumed it was Carnage, judging by the fearful expressions of his peers as he stormed about angrily. And somehow, I doubted giving an angry teenager the power over a group of armed ponies was the best idea, never mind the physical implications of his fearsome appearance. "Come on out, you little fucker, come on!" he shouted up to the roof. If he wasn't doused in blood, flames, and didn't have all the ponies about him scared shitless, then I may have been tempted to call his tantrum amusing. Nevertheless, I had to work out a way of getting us out of here, which meant getting past him. Somehow. "Fire again!" Carnage instructed the rocket launcher buck firmly, pointing out to the crumpled roof with a gore-stained hoof. "I said, fire!" he said impatiently, as the buck squirmed nervously, firing again. I ducked back behind the crate as the explosion rang out, bringing a good piece of roof down with it. The buck firing the rocket was not so lucky, as the rubble crashed atop of him with a thunderous boom. Several ponies coughed as the dust of the impact bloomed through the room, yet as Carnage's burning gaze cast over them, they froze as best as they could. The fiery buck just looked back at the pile of rubble triumphantly, sharp white teeth flashing as his bloodshot gaze glanced up at the hole above. Several walkways and corridors had given away with a roof, leaving the level above exposed. Rubbing the dust from my eyes, I looked back at them with a newfound disgust. They may have not been good ponies, but to so readily suffer the lives of even their own that was just incredibly harsh. "Come on out! Come the fuck down here, you little fucker!" Carnage raged, to no pony particular.
Well, I think some pony has a favorite word.
I noted at the repeated cursing. Meanwhile, I swallowed my anger. I mean, there was no way I was taking on all of them, especially that rage-filled monster pony thing. I mean, he barely may be a buck, but there was a reason that the other ponies didn't question his furious cruelty. I glanced over to the service elevator, looking for our way out. Looking back, I could see the crates that could shield us, mostly the way around it, but yet I had no idea how fast it would climb once we were on it, nor how long it may take to activate it. All of which would be time spent onto the line of fire.
Well, if you insist, but this behavior is most unacceptable.
A familiar, charismatic voice stated dryly.